Hello and welcome, my beautiful friends. So I'm trying something a little different with the camera. It's a little high up, I feel, but I'm trying a little something. Sorry I was not available yesterday. I was really busy, and I'm later today than I would actually like to be. However, thank you for those of you who could figure out that I'm here today. We are going to continue reading The Baron. I've got a couple of things coming up for you. After we finish The Baron, we've got some other books, some other vintage classic novels to go through. And now, my beauties, hello, lovely to see you. Now, my beauties, we continue the adventures of Baron Munchausen. And let me get my ratty wig. If Lisa Fabio is watching, this is no way an insult to you who makes beautiful wigs. This one is not a Lisa Fabio. This one is not a Lisa Fabio. She let me know it, by the way. So we'll put this on right here. There. Now see how fun that is? Oh, I meant to tell you before we get into the book, we have a new video coming out this week, coming out on Thursday and Thursday. I think it's Thursday. Anyway, then I worked on one today about cleansing your space. So you don't want to miss those. You definitely don't. Anyway, my beauties, thank you for being here. And without further ado, we continue the adventures of Baron Munchausen. Preface to the second volume. Baron Munchausen has certainly been productive of much benefit to the literary world. The numbers of erogenous travels have been such that they demanded a very Gulliver to surprise them. The Baron de Tott dauntlessly discharged an enormous piece of artillery. The Baron Munchausen has done more. He has taken it and swam with it across the sea. When the travelers are solicitous to be the heroes of their own story, surely they must admit to superiority and blush at seeing themselves outdone by the renowned Munchausen. I doubt whether anyone hitherto, Pantagruel, Gargantua, Captain Lemuel, or de Tott, has been able to outdo our Baron in this species of excellence. And as at present, our curiosity seems much directed to the interior of Africa. It must be edifying to have the real relation of Munchausen's adventures there before any further intelligence arrives. He seems to adapt himself and his exploits to the spirit of the times, and recounts what he thinks should be most interesting to his auditors. I do not say that the Baron in the following stories means a satire on any political matters whatever. No, but if the reader understands them, so I cannot help it. The Baron meets with a parcel of Negro ships carrying whites into slavery to work on their plantations in a cold climate. Should we therefore imagine that he intends a reflection on the present traffic in human flesh, and that if the Negro should do so, it would be simple justice, as retaliation is the law of God? If we were to think this is a reflection on any present commercial or political matter, we should be tempted to imagine perhaps some political ideas conveyed in every page, in every sentence of the whole. Whether such things are not the intentions of the Baron, the reader must judge. We have not only had wonderful travellers in this vile world, but splendid travels, and of these not a few, and also conspicuous enough. It is a pity, therefore, that the Baron has not endeavoured to surprise them also in this species of storytelling. Who is it can read the travels of Smelfung, as Sterne calls him, without admiration? To think that a person from the north of Scotland should travel through some of the most of the finest countries in Europe, and find fault with everything he meets, nothing to please him, and therefore methinks the tour to the Hebrides is more excusable. And also, perhaps, Mr. Twist's tour in Ireland. Dr. Johnson, bred the luxuriance of London, with more reason should become cross and splenetic in the bleak and dreary regions of the Hebrides. The Baron, in the following work, seems to be sometimes philosophical. His account of the language of the interior of Africa, and its analogy with that of the inhabitants of the moon, show him to be profoundly versed in etymological antiquities of nations, and throw new light upon the abstruse history of the ancient Scythians and the Collectinia. His endeavor to abolish the custom of eating native flesh in the interior of Africa, as described at Bruce's travels, is certainly humane, but far be it from me to suppose that by Gog and Magog and the Lord Mayor's show he means a satire upon any person or body of persons whatever, or by a tedious litigated trial of blind judges and dumb matrons following a wild goose chase all around the world. You should glance at any trial whatever. Nevertheless, I must allow that it was extremely presumptuous in Munchausen to tell half of the sovereigns of the world that they were wrong, and advise them what they ought to do, and that instead of ordering millions of their subjects to massacre one another, it would be more to their interest to employ their forces in concert for the general good, as if he knew better than the Empress of Russia, the Grand Vizier, Prince Potemkin, or any other butcher in the world, but that he should be a royal aristocrat and take the part of the injured queens of France in the present political drama. I am not at all surprised, but I suppose his mind was fired by reading the pamphlet written by Mr. Burke. The second volume, chapter 21st. All that I have related before said the Baron is gospel, and if there be any one so hardy as to deny it, I am ready to fight him with any weapon he pleases. He cried, yes, he cried he, in more elevated tone, as he started from his seat. I will condemn him to swallow this decanter, glass and all, perhaps, and fill with a Wasser. It's a kind of ardent spirit distilled from the cherries and much used in some parts of Germany. Therefore, my dear friends and companions, have confidence in what I say and pay honor to the tales of Munchausen. A traveler has a right to relate and embellish his adventures as he so pleases, and it is very unpolite to refuse deference and applause they deserve. Having passed some time in England since the completion of my former memoirs, I at length began to revolve in my mind what a prodigious field of discovery must be in the interior part of Africa. I could not sleep with the thoughts of it. I therefore determined to gain every proper assistance from government to penetrate the celebrated source of the Nile, and assume the viceroyship of the interior kingdom of Africa, or at least the great realm of Monomotapa. It was happy for me that I had one of the most powerful friends at court, whom I shall call the illustrious Hilaro Frosticos. You perchance know him not by that name, but we had a language among ourselves, as we well may, for in the course of my peregrinations, I have acquired precisely 999 leash of languages. What, gentlemen? Do you stare? While I allow there are not so many languages spoken in this vile world, but then, have I not been to the moon? And trust me, whenever I write a treatise upon education, I shall delineate methods of inculating whole dozens of other languages at once: French, Spanish, Greek, Hebrew, Cherokee, etc., 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 in such a style as will shame the pedagogues existing. Having passed a whole night without being able to sleep for the vivid imagination of African discoveries, I hasten to levy my illustrious friend, Hilaro Frosticos, and having mentioned my intention with all the vigour of fancy, he gravely considered my words, and after some awful meditations, thus he spoke: Olog ma ganset istom fulma cum dara kagos belgardesh assum balgo barketos triangulismas. However, added he, it behoveth thee to consider and ponder well upon the perils and the multitudinous dangers in the way that white who thus advanceth in all the precumbulation of adventures. And verily, most valiant sire and baron, I hope thou wilt demean thyself with all the landable gravity and precaution, which, as is related in 347th chapter of the Profligates, is more consideration than all the merit in the terraqueous globe. Yes, most truly do I advise thee unto thy good, and speak unto thee, most valiant Munchausen, with the greatest esteem, and wish thee to succeed in thy voyage. For it is said that in the interior realms of Africa there are tribes that can see but just 3.5 inches beyond the extremity of their own noses, and verily thou shouldest moderate thyself, even sure and slow. They stumble who walk fast, but we shall bring you unto the Lady Fraginita, and have her opinion of the matter. He then took from his pocket a cap of dignity, such as described in the most honourable and antique heraldry, and placing it upon my head, addressed me thusly: As thou seemest again to revive the spirits of ancient adventure, permit me to place upon thy head this favour as a mark of esteem in which I hold thy valorous disposition. The Lady Fragranita, my dear friends, was one of the most divine creatures in all of Great Britain, and was desperately in love with me. She was drawing my portrait upon a piece of white satin when the most noble Hilaro Frosticos advanced. He pointed to the cap of dignity which he had placed upon my head. I do declare, Hilaro, said the lovely Fraginita, 'tis pretty, 'tis interesting. I love you, and I like you, my dear Baron, said she, putting on another plume. This gives it an air more delicate and more fantastical. I do thus, my dear Munchausen, as your friend, yet you can reject or accept my present, just as you please. But I like the fancy, 'tis a good one, and I mean to improve it, and against whatever enemies you go, I shall have the sweet satisfaction of remembering you bearing my favour on your hand. I snatched it with trepidation, and gracefully dropping on my knee, I 3 times kissed it, with all the rapture of romantic love. I swear, cried I, by the bright eyes, and by the lovely whiteness of thine arms, that no savage tyrant or enemy upon the face of the earth shall despoil me of this favour, while 1 drop of the blood of Munchausen doth circulate in my veins. I will bear it triumphant through all the realms of Africa, whither I now intend my course, and make it respected even in the court of Prester John. I admire your spirit, replied she, and shall usurp my utmost interest at court to have you dispatched with every pomp and soon as possible. But here comes the most brilliant company indeed. Lady Carolina Wilhelmina Amelia Skeggs, Lord Spigot and Lady Fawcett, and the Countess of Bel-Air. After the ceremonies of introduction to this company were over, we proceeded to consult upon the business, and as the cause met with general applause, it was immediately determined that I should proceed without delay, as soon as I obtained the sovereign appropriation. I am convinced, said Lord Spigot, that if there be anything really unknown and worthy of our most ardent curiosity, it must be in the immense regions of Africa. That country, which seems to be of the oldest on the globe, and yet with the greater part of which we are almost utterly unacquainted. What prodigious wealth of gold and diamonds must not lie concealed in those torrid regions, when the very rivers of the coast pour forth continual specimens of gold sand? 'Tis my opinion, therefore, that the Baron deserves the applause of all of Europe, for his spirit and merits the most powerful assistance of the sovereign. So flattering an approbation, you may be sure, was delightful to my heart, and with every confidence and joy, I suffered them to take me to court that instant. After the unusual ceremonies of introduction, suffice it to say that I met with every honour and applause that my most sanguine expectations could demand. I had always a taste for the fashionable je ne sais quoi of the most elegant society, and in the presence of all of the sovereigns of Europe, I ever found myself quite at home, and experienced from the whole court the most flattering esteem and admiration. I remember one particular day the fate of the unfortunate Marquis de Bellecourt. The Countess of Racinda, who accompanied him, looked most divinely. Yes, I am confident, said the Marquis de Bellecourt to me, that I have acted according to the strictest sentiments of justice and of loyalty to my sovereign. What stronger breastplate than a heart untainted? And, though I did not receive a word nor a look, yet I cannot think, no, it were impossible to be misrepresented. Conscious of my own integrity, I will try again. I will go boldly up. The Marquis de Bellecourt saw the opportunity. He advanced 3 paces, put his hand upon his breast, and bowed. Permit me, said he, with the most profound respect to. His tongue faltered. He could scarcely believe his sight, for at the moment the whole company were moving out of the room. He found himself alone, deserted by everyone. What, said he, and did he turn upon his heels, and the most marked contempt? Would he not speak to me? Would he not even hear me utter a word in my defence? His heart died within him. Not even a look, a smile from anyone. My friends, do they not know me? Do they not see me? Alas, they fear to catch the contagion of my... Then, said he, adieu. 'Tis more than I can bear. I shall go to my country seat, and never, never will return. Adieu, fond court, adieu. The venerable Marquis de Bellecourt stopped for a moment ere he entered his carriage. Thrice he looked back, and thrice he wiped the starting tear from his eyes. Yes, said he, for once at least truth shall be found in the bottom of a well. Peace to thy ghost, most noble Marquis. A king of kings shall pity thee, and thousands who are yet unborn shall owe their happiness to thee and have cause to bless thee. Thousands, perhaps, then shall never know thy name. Out Munchausen's self shall celebrate thy glory. Chapter 22nd. Everything being concluded, and having received my instructions for the voyage, I was conducted by the illustrious Hilaro Frosticos, the Lady Fragianita, and a prodigious crowd of nobility, and placed sitting upon the summit of the whale's bones at Palace, and having remained in this situation for 3 days and 3 nights as a trial ordeal, and a specimen of my perseverance and resolution, the 3rd hour after midnight, they seated me in the chariot of Queen Mab. It was a prodigious dimension, large enough to contain more stowage than the ton of Heidelberg, and globular like a hazelnut. In fact, it seemed to be really a hazelnut grown to the most extravagant dimensions. And that a great worm of proportionable enormity had bored a hole in the shell. Through the same entrance I was ushered. It was as large as a coach door, and I took my seat in the centre, a kind of chair, self-balanced without touching anything, like the fancied tomb of Mahomet. The whole iteration surface of the nutshell appeared a luminous representation of all of the stars of heaven, and fixed stars, the planets, and the comet. The stars were as large as those worn by our first nobility, and the comet, excessively brilliant, seemed as if you had assembled all the eyes of the beautiful girls in the kingdom, and combined them like a peacock's plumage into the form of a comet. That is, a globe, and a bearded tail to it, diminishing gradually to a point. This beautiful constellation seemed very supportive and delightful. It was much in the form of a tadpole, and without ceasing went full of playful giddiness up and down all over the heaven of the concave surface of the nutshell. One time it would be part of the heavens under my feet, and in the next minute would be over my head. It was never at rest, but forever going east, west, north, or south, and paid no more respect to the difficult worlds than if they were so many lanterns without reflectors. Some of them he would dash against and push out of their places. Others he would burn up and consume to ashes. And others, again, he would split into fritters, and their fragments would instantly take a globular form, like spilled quicksilver, and become satellites to whatever other worlds they should happen to meet within their career. In short, the whole seemed an epitome of the creation past, present, and future, and all that passes among the stars during 1,000 years was here generally performed in as many seconds. I surveyed all the beauties of the chariot with the wonder and delight. Certainly, cried I, this is heaven in miniature. In short, I took the reins in my hand, but before I proceeded on my adventures, I shall mention to the rest of my attendant furniture. The chariot was drawn by a team of 9 bulls harnessed to it, 3 after 3. In the first rank was the most tremendous bull named John Mamowski. The rest were called Jacks in general, but not dignified by any particular denomination. They were all shod for the journey, not indeed like horses with iron, or as bullocks commonly are, to drag on a cart, but were snod with men's skulls. Each of their feet was a hoof, and all crammed into a man's head, cut off for the purpose, and fastened herein with a kind of cement or paste, so that the skull seemed to be part of the foot and the hoof of the animal. With these skull shoes, the creatures could perform astonishing journeys, and slide upon the water or upon the ocean with great velocity. The harnesses were fastened with golden buckles, and decked with studs in superb style, and the creatures were ridden by 9 postilions, crickets of great size, as large as monkeys, who sat squat upon the heads of the bulls, and were continually chirping at most infernal rate. Loud in proportion to their bodies, the wheels of the chariot consisted of upwards to 10,000 springs, formed so as to give the greater impetuosity to the vehicle, and were more complex than dozen clocks like that of Strasbourg. The external of the chariot was adorned with banners and a superb festoon of the laurel that formerly shaded me on horseback, and now having given you a very concise description of my machine for travelling into Africa, which you must allow to be far superior to the apparatus of Monsieur Valiant, I shall proceed to relate the exploits of my voyage. Chapter 23rd. Taking the reins in my hand, while the music gave a general salute, I cracked my whip, away they went, and in 3 hours I found myself just between the Isle of Wight and the mainland of England. Here I remained for 4 days, until I had received part of my accompaniment, which I was ordered to take under my convoy. 'Twas a squadron of men-of-war that had been long time prepared for the Baltic, but which were now destined for the Mediterranean, by the assistance of large hooks and eyes, exactly such as were worn in our hats, but of greater size, some hundredweight each. The men-of-war hooked themselves on to the wheels of the vehicle, and in fact nothing could be more simple or convenient, because they could be hooked or unhooked in an instant with utmost facility. In short, having given a general discharge of their artillery and 3 cheers, I cracked my whip. Away we went, helter-skelter, and in 6 jiffies I found myself and all my retinue safe and in good spirits, just as the Rock of Gibraltar. Here I unhooked my squadron, and having taken an affectionate leave of officers, I suffered them to proceed their ordinary manner to the place of their destination. The whole garrison were highly delighted with the novelty of my vehicle, and at the pressing solicitations of the governor and the officers, I went ashore and took a view of that barren old rock, about which more powder has been fired away than would purchase twice as much fertile ground in any part of the world. Mounting my chariot, I took the reins and again made forward in mad career, down the Mediterranean to the Isle of Candia. Here I received dispatches from the Sublime Porte, entreating me to assist in the war against Russia, with the reward of the whole island of Candia for my alliance. At first I hesitated, thinking that the island of Candia would be most valuable acquisition to the sovereign who at that time employed me. And that the most delicious wines, sugar, and etc., its abundance would flourish on the island. Yet, when I considered the trade of East India Company, which would most probably suffer by the intercourse with Persia through the Mediterranean, I at once rejected the proposal, and had afterwards the thanks of the Honourable of the House of Commons for my propriety and political discernment. Having been properly refreshed in Candia, I again proceeded, and in short time arrived in the land of Egypt. The land of this country, at least the part of it near the sea, is very low, so that I came upon it ere I was aware, and the pillar of Pompeii got entangled in the various wheels of the machine, and damaged the whole considerably. Still, I drove on through the thick and thin, till passing over that great obelisk, the Needle of Cleopatra, the work got entangled again, and jolted at a miserable rate over the mud and swampy ground of all of that country. Yet my poor bulls trotted on, with astonishing labour across the Isthmus of Suez into the Red Sea, and left a track, an obscure channel, which has since been taken by de Tott for the remains of a canal cut by some of the Ptolemies from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, but as you perceive, was in reality no more than the track of my chariot and the car of Queen Mab. As the artists at present in that country are nothing wonderful, though the ancient Egyptians, 'tis said, were the most astonishing fellows. I could not procure any new coach springs or have a possibility of setting my machine to rights in the kingdom of Egypt. And as I could not presume to attempt another journey overland the great mountains of marble beyond the source of the Nile, I thought it most eligible to make the best way I could by the sea, to the Cape of Good Hope, where I supposed I should get some Dutch smiths and carpenters, or perhaps some English artists. And my vehicle being properly repaired, it was my intention thence to proceed overland through the heart of Africa. The surface of the water, I well know, afforded less resistance to the wheels of the machine. It passed along the waves like the chariot of Neptune, and in short, having gotten upon the Red Sea, we suited away to admiration through the pass of Bab el-Mandel to the great western coast of Africa, where Alexander had not the courage to venture. And really, my friends, if Alexander had ventured towards the Cape of Good Hope, he most probably would have never returned. It is difficult to determine whether there were then any inhabitants in the more southern parts of Africa or not. Yet at any rate, this conqueror of the world would have made but a nonsensical adventure. His miserable ships, not contrived for long voyage, would have become leaky and foundered before he could have doubled the Cape and left his Majesty fairly beyond the limits of the then known world. Yet it would have been an August exit for an Alexander, after having subdued Persia and India, to go wandering the Lord knows where, to Jupiter, Ammon, perhaps, or to the voyage to the moon, as the Indian chief once said to Captain Cook. But for my part, I was far more successful than Alexander. I drove on with the most amazing rapidity, and thinking to halt on the shores of the Cape, I unfortunately drove too close and shattered the right side wheels of my vehicle against the rock now called the Table Mountain. The machine went against it with such impetuosity as completely shivered the rock and in a horizontal direction, so that the summit of the mountains in the form of the semisphere was knocked into the sea. And the steep mountain, becoming thereby flattened at the top, has since received the name of the Table Mountain from its similarity to that piece of furniture. Just as this part of the mountain was knocked off, the ghost of the Cape, that tremendous sprite, which cuts such a figure on the Lusiad, was discovering sitting squat in an excavation formed for him in the center of the mountain. He seemed just like a young bee in his little cell before he comes forth, or like a bean in a bean pod. And when the upper part of the mountain was split across and knocked off, the superior half of his person was discovered. He appeared of bottle blue color and started dazzled with the unexpected glare of the light. Hearing the dreadful rattle of the wheels and the loud chirping of the crickets, he was thunderstruck, and instantly grieving, a shriek sunk down 10,000 fathoms into the earth, while the mountain, vomiting out some smoke, silently closed up and left not a trace behind. I think we can do one more chapter. Little water though. I hope you're enjoying it. The Baron is quite, he's quite an unusual character, isn't he? Chapter 24. I perceived with grief, consternation, the miscarriage of all of my apparatus. Yet I was not absolutely dejected. A great mind is never known but in adversity. With permission of the Dutch governor, the chariot was properly laid upon the great storehouse erected in the water's edge, and the bulls received every refreshment possible after so terrible a voyage. Well, you may be sure they deserved it, and therefore every attendance was engaged for them until I should return. As it was not possible to do anything more, I took my passage in a homeward-bound Indiaman to return to London and lay the matter before the Privy Council. We met with nothing particular until we arrived upon the coast of Guinea, where, to our utter astonishment, we perceived a great hill, seemingly of glass, advancing against us in open sea. The rays of the sun were reflected upon it with such splendor that it was extremely difficult to gaze at the phenomenon. I immediately knew it was to be an island of ice, and though in so very warm a latitude, determined to make all possible sail from such horrible danger. We did so, but all in vain, for about 11 o'clock at night, bowling a very hard gale and exceedingly dark, we struck upon the island. Nothing could equal the distraction, the shrieks and despair of the whole crew, until I, knowing that it was not a moment to be lost, cheered up their spirits and bade them not despond, but do as I should request upon them. In a few minutes the vessel was half full of water, and the enormous castle of ice that seemed to hem us in on every side, in some places falling in hideous fragments upon the deck, killed the one half of the crew, upon which, getting upon the summit of the mast, I contrived to make it a fast to the great promontory of the ice, and calling to the remainder of the crew to follow me, we all escaped from the wreck and got up on the summit of the island. The rising sun soon gave us a dreadful prospect of our situation, and the loss, or rather icification, of the vessel. Or being closed in on every side with castles of ice during the night, she was absolutely frozen over and buried in such a manner that we could behold her under our feet, even in the central solidity of the island. Having debated what was the best to be done, we immediately cut down through the ice and got up some of the cables from the vessel and the boats, which, making fast to the island, we towed it up with all of our might, determined to bring home island and all, or perish in the attempt. On the summit of the island we placed what oakum and dregs of every kind of matter we could get from the vessel, which, in the space of a very few hours, on account of the liquefying of the ice, the warmth of the sun, we were transformed into fine manure, and as I had some seeds of exotic vegetables in my pocket, we shortly had a sufficiency of fruits and roots growing upon the island to supply the whole crew, especially the breadfruit tree, a few plants of which had been in the vessel, and another tree which bore plum puddings so very hot and with such exquisite proportion of sugar, fruit, and etc., etc., that we all acknowledged it was not possible to taste anything of the kind more delicious in all of England. In short, though, the scurvy had made such dreadful progress among the ply of vegetables, and especially the breadfruit and pudding fruit, put an almost immediate stop to the distemper. We had not proceeded thus many weeks, advancing with incredible fatigue by continual towing, when we fell in the fleet of negromen, as they call them. These wretches, I must inform you, my dear friends, had found means to make prizes of the vessels from some Europeans upon the coast of Guinea, and tasting the sweets of our luxury, had formed colonies in several new discovered islands near the South Pole, where they had a variety of plantations of such matters as would only grow in the coldest of climates. As the black inhabitants of Guinea were unsuited to the climate and excessive cold of the country, they formed the diabolical project of getting Christian slaves to work for them, For this purpose, they sent vessels every year to the coast of Scotland and northern parts of Ireland and Wales, and were even sometimes seen off the coast of Cornwall. And having purchased or entrapped by fraud or by violence a great number of men, women, and children, who proceeded with their cargoes of human flesh to the other end of the world, and sold them to the planters, where they were flogged into obedience, and made to work like horses all the rest of their lives. My blood ran cold at the idea, while everyone on the island also expressed his horror that such acquisitions and iniquitous traffic should be suffered to exist. But, except by open violence, it was found impossible to destroy the trade on account of the barbarous prejudice entertained of the late Negroes that the white people have no souls. However, we were determined to attack them, and steering down our island upon them, soon overwhelmed them with. We saved as many of the white people as possible, but pushed all the blacks into the water again. The poor creatures we saved from slavery were so overjoyed that they wept aloud through gratitude, and we experienced every delightful sensation to think what happiness we should shower upon their parents, their brothers, and their sisters, their children, by bringing them home safe, redeemed from slavery, to the bosom of their native country. Having happily arrived in England, I immediately laid a statement of my voyage, and etc., before the Privy Council, and entreated an immediate assistance to travel into Africa, and, if possible, refit my former machine and take it along with the rest. Everything was instantly granted to my satisfaction, and I received orders to get myself ready for departure as soon as possible. As the Emperor of China had sent the most curious animal as a present to Europe, which was kept in the Tower, and it being of an enormous stature and capable of performing the voyage with éclat, she was ordered to attend me. She was called Sphinx, and was one of the most tremendous, though magnificent figures I had ever beheld. She was harnessed with superb trappings to a large flat-bottomed boat in which was placed an edifice of wood, exactly resembling Westminster Hall. 2 balloons were placed over it, tackled by a number of ropes to the boat, to keep up proper equilibrium and prevent it from overturning, or filling, from the prodigious weight of the fabric. The interior of the edifice was decorated with seats in the form of an amphitheatre, and crammed as full as it could hold with ladies and lords as a council at the retinue for your humble servant. Nearly in the centre was a seat elegantly decorated for myself, and on the other side of me was placed the famous Gog and Magog in their pomp. The Lord Viscount Gossamer being our postilion, we floated gallantly down the river, the noble Sphinx gambolling like a huge leviathan, and towing after her the boat and balloons. Thus we advanced easily, gently, into the open sea. Being calm weather, we could carefully feel the motion of the vehicle, and passed our time to grand debate upon the glorious intention of the voyage, and the discoveries that would result. I am of opinion, said the noble friend, Hilaro Frosticos, that Africa was originally inhabited for the greater part, or I may say, subjugated by lions, which next to man seem to be the most dreaded of all mortal tyrants. The country in general, at least what we have been hitherto able to discover, seems rather inimical to human life. The intolerable dryness of the place, the burning sands that overwhelm whole armies and cities in general ruin, and the hideous life many roving hordes are compelled to lead, incline me to think that if ever we form any great settlements therein, it will become the grave of our countrymen. Yet, It is nearer to us than the East Indies, and I cannot but imagine that in many places every production of China and of the East and West Indies would flourish if properly attended to. And as the country is so prodigiously extensive and unknown, what a source of discovery must not it contain? In fact, we know less about the interior of Africa than we do the moon, for in this latter we measure the very prominence and observance, the varieties and inequalities of the surface through our glasses. Forests and mountains on her spotted orbs. But we see nothing in the interior of Africa but what some compilers of maps or geographers have fanciful enough to imagine. What a happy event, therefore, should we not expect from a voyage of discovery and colonization, undertaken in so magnificent a style as the present? What a pride, what an acquisition to philosophy! I believe, dear friends, that we shall end right there. Remember, my lovelies, this book was written in the 1790s. It is important to note here how the Baron does relate slavery of any kind. He talks about, in retaliation, people of color took people who were from the northern parts of the English Isles, the British Isles, and well, anyway, they got what they deserved. That's what I say. It's a very old book, so some things are outdated. It's a very flowery book. The next one is going to be a lot newer than this. I'm so excited. I don't want to announce what the book is yet, but it's also in public domain, but it is newer. You're going to love it. Make certain to check out the videos I have. We've got one coming out on, I just finished filming one about cleansing your space. We've got another one coming out this week on Thursday, and that one is about, oh goodness, I can't even remember what that one's about. thegentlemanpsychic.com, you definitely want to get your readings there. I appreciate you, my beauties. Like, share, comment, subscribe.
And how much newer is the new book?
Oh, how much newer is the new book? Well, I'm going to tell you where this particular copy of the book that I'm reading is about 70, that doesn't have the copyright, but it does have in pencil 1899 in pencil, but it is, I would assume this book is probably 1880s, this particular one, but the new book is 1891. So even though this story right here is 1790s, it's a full 100 years newer. So that says something, and it takes place in New York. I'm really excited to show you. I'm going to only tell you it has a devil in it and a doctor, but that's about all I can tell you. Anyway, my beauties, thank you for all of the likes, the comments, the shares. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for listening to this book. I love this book. It's such a piece of history. With that, I love you. I will chat with you next time.